Buyers and sellers notoriously see this from a completely different point of view.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another webisode of the Sunbelt Insider here at the local Silicon Valley, San Jose, Santa Clara, California coast, Northern California Sunbelt Business Brokerage office, where we talk about some of the hairy things that come up if you're a buyer that's trying to buy a business, a seller that's trying to sell your business. When that deal happens, things that come up that we didn't really expect to happen initially, or it just got hairy. And you're going to see how internally, when we talk about that as a team, how we come up with solutions and overcome those things so that you can achieve your goal. Today, I want to welcome Jordan Zweighorn. Jordan is one of our senior agents here on the team. He's got a bedside manner like no other. So if you're stressed out by things like this, he's the guy you want to work with. But Jordan's also got a background working in software, and also he's owned his own business in the past as well, a small local well-known restaurant chain. So Jordan's been through it all, and so he sold his business through Sunbelt and loved the process so much, became part of our team. Jordan, today you wanted to talk about sales backlog during the sale of a business, how that can break a deal or even help make the deal. So why don't you go ahead and get into it for us? What's sales backlog, and do you have maybe any recent experiences that you might want to share? You can do that as well.
So there's this thing that comes up in certain kinds of businesses, which is known as sales backlog. JC, you mentioned things like gift cards and things of that manner. Those are pretty typical and common things where you sell a gift card and the value of that gift card is still hanging out there. That's essentially a liability to the seller until such time that a customer comes in down the road to claim that gift card. So in that example, there's always at the time of a transaction closing a credit to the buyer for the value of those gift cards because the seller's already collected that money. Sales backlog is something a little bit different. This has to do with orders of products or services from customers where the service or the product hasn't yet been delivered yet. So it's not yet billable, but it is pre-sold. And this sometimes causes issues in the minds of sellers and buyers. And it's a funny thing because buyers and sellers notoriously see this from a completely different point of view.
Yeah, for sure. So as far as buyers and sellers are concerned, it sounds like at closing then is when pre-sales and things like that would be accounted for. Am I understanding that correctly?
So in a case like this, let's say, you're a furniture business and there's been a lot of supply chain issues with furniture. So let's say a customer buys $10,000 of furniture today, but that order is not going to be delivered for another 4 months. And yet the deal is closing tomorrow. The seller's done all the work to sell that piece of furniture. The order's been written up, but the order has not yet been fulfilled. Who gets credit for that order, right? And that is the crux of the issue, because oftentimes sellers will look at it and say, I've done all the work. I've done all the selling up front. I've consulted with the customer. I've written up the order. I should get credit for that. And the buyer saying, well, no, it's mine because I'm buying the business tomorrow and you haven't fulfilled this order yet. It belongs to me. In there sometimes lies some negotiation, and it's a gray area, and there's not a one size fits all answer to the problem.
Yes, I was just about to ask you what you thought was right or wrong, but it sounds like what you're saying is that it's a gray area. So does that mean that it's up to the buyer and the seller at the time of the transaction to talk about, discuss what the best option is in that particular situation?
Yes, but I'd say before you even get to that point, and I think one of the reasons you involve a professional in business transactions is because you want to get ahead of issues like that. You don't want that to come up in the 11th hour where you're a week before closing and suddenly there's this issue of could be $1 million that is suddenly at issue just prior to closing. And if you don't get ahead of things like that, it could kill a deal after so much work and effort has been expended by both parties. And so usually what I see happen is that if a seller wants a certain amount for the business and it's a reasonable amount and the valuation suggests that maybe even at the higher end of the range, but if it's in the range, then it's not uncommon for a seller to say, hey, if I get an offer at or near full price, I'm willing to let the backlog go to the buyer.
So it could be leveraged, say, to maybe get a better price for your deal. It's on the table like anything else. For instance, a specific piece of furniture, fixtures, or equipment that has some value that you could add to the deal to spice it up a little bit and use that as leverage, something along those lines.
Right. Let's say there's a vehicle that, was sort of partially used in the business and the seller was going to keep it to themselves. And maybe the seller says, you know what? At a full price offer, I don't care about that vehicle, buyer, you can have it. It's almost that kind of a mentality, but this is, sometimes the value that could be attributed to this backlog could be more significant than, the value of maybe a used vehicle. I completed a deal last year that, the sales backlog was in the millions of dollars, and the offer from the buyer was on the lower side, and the seller said, I want a piece of that backlog. And then the question is, well, what's a reasonable amount? To the extent of buyers even open to the idea of backlog, a buyer would feel like something on the order of a sales commission is enough. Maybe 10% of the value of that backlog when it comes in down the road. But oftentimes sellers are saying, no, it's more than that. I've done a lot more. I want 30 or 40% of the value of that backlog when it comes in. But also sellers need to look at it from the buyer's point of view, because when a buyer agrees to that, they're really cutting into their cash flow of the business for some time to come. And it kind of hamstrings their ability to effectively run the business successfully. So there's a fine balance between whether or not it makes sense at all to ask a buyer to pay for some of that backlog. I think what it really comes down to is, what is the value of the overall deal? If a buyer comes in with a strong offer, and part of the value of the deal in the first place might be because there's a significant backlog, which is a benefit to the buyer, then everyone wins. You get a full price offer, the buyer gets the full amount of the backlog, and you don't have this complication after closing of needing to account for, track, and have payments going back and forth between the buyer and seller for backlog.
Right. So just clarifying the definition of backlog, it's not necessarily prepaid, but it could be an order that was made, and then that order is to be later fulfilled, meaning that the customer receives their order and pays at that time. So this is both neither delivery of the product or the payment for the product prior to the sale of the business, and it occurs after the sale of the business. And then who does it belong to at that point, the buyer or the seller? Am I understanding that right?
That's correct. And there's sometimes some confusion between backlog and accounts receivable. Accounts receivable in most asset sales belong to the seller, unless it's negotiated otherwise. That's pretty standard within an asset sale. But what's different about sales backlog is you've written up the order, the work's been done to facilitate that order. It's just that it's not billable yet to the client because the service or the product hasn't yet been delivered. And that's where the issue lies, because the buyer says that's mine and the seller says no, it's mine. And I think it's important for a seller to get comfortable with the idea that the value of their business includes that backlog, and at the right dollar price of an offer, that backlog should naturally be included. It's almost like saying the value of your business has inventory, or the value of your business has furniture, fixtures, and equipment. These are aspects of the business that the buyer will want to make an offer on. And so by carving out sales backlog up front, I think it maybe puts sellers at a just disadvantage.
Yeah, that makes sense. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but buyers, who aren't entrepreneurial, they would rather not start their own business, which has extreme risk, come in and buy these pre-existing businesses. And as long as they keep it running the way it's been running, it's going to continue to make that income. So they like that low risk factor. And when you have sales that are upcoming, not only saying, hey, if you buy my business, you can earn this revenue, but we've already got sales ready to go for you. So you're really doing more to add mitigating factors to the risk of buying a business or owning a business.
Absolutely. So I would say that a seller should be encouraged to include the sales backlog, unless you get to a situation where a buyer comes in and makes an offer. Let's say the seller's looking for $2 million for a business, and a buyer comes in and offers $1 million. One way to come back and negotiate is to say, okay, well, we'll meet you at 1.2 million, but we want 10% of the sales backlog, right? So it's potentially a way to negotiate on the low end offer and still make that offer work.
Right.
But what it shouldn't be is, okay, I want full value for the business, and I also want X% of the backlog. I think that's a difficult starting position.
Right. Yeah. Like any other negotiation, you can't be completely one-sided and stick to it. You have to be, flexible. Sellers flexibility, buyers flexibility. Flexibility is what's going to help you sell the business you want to sell or buy that business that you ultimately want to buy and walk away with a good deal. It's got to be a good deal for both sides. Yeah. Trying to get full price for the business and sales backlog. It's a little one-sided. If you have a buyer that wants to accept that, good for you, but that's going to be rare. And so you really have to think about having an open mind with your sales backlog is really more of a negotiation tool to make the deal work in the end for both buyer and seller. So either way, you have to make it work, and together with flexibility, it's something that you won't lose on. Flexibility isn't taking a loss, it's just making things work so that the deal can happen.
Absolutely. And I think, kind of maybe the last point on that is I think buyers and sellers alike need to kind of take a step back and try to put themselves in one another's shoes, because on this particular issue, I've never seen an issue be so divisive between buyers and sellers, where a seller will always look at it only from their point of view, and a buyer will do the same. So it's helpful and healthy to kind of take a step out of your shoes. If you're the seller, put yourself in the buyer's shoes and vice versa. So you can really see it from all vantage points.
Jordan, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thanks so much. I even learned a lot in this discussion. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the viewers?
Only that, this is just one example of areas where buyers and sellers don't always see things from the same point of view. So I would say in every deal, this comes up. Buyers think a certain way, sellers think another way. So I think it's always useful and helpful to put yourself in the other person's shoes and try to see it from their standpoint, which doesn't mean that you should always give in to a buyer or a seller's demands, but it's always helpful to look at it from the other guy's or girl's perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's the soul of this webisode series. Those are what I call the hairy things. It's the personal things. It's the emotional things. It's the, am I doing this right? Am I doing too much? Am I giving too little? It's all that stuff, and who do you think's there to help you figure all that out? That's what business advisors do. Much like a wedding planner at a wedding, when the bride is wondering, did I greet everyone? Did everyone get a piece of cake and all that? Do you really want to worry about all that? Well, you will, but if you have a wedding planner there, they're going to be able to help you navigate that because they've done it many times before. And the same goes for business advisors. That's what we do. We've done this many times before. And as we talk through these things as a team, when you encounter a challenge like this, we already have the experience. We've done it before. Of course, it's not going to be exactly applicable to your scenario, but we understand the philosophy behind it, and we also understand how to make a deal good for both parties on both sides. Jordan, thanks again, man. Really enjoyed having you here on this webisode, and I look forward to having you again host another one for us on another subject. What'd you think? Did you have more questions? Did we answer a question you might have already had? Was it boring? Was it exciting? Did it make you think? Is it something that's going to stick in your mind? Let us know. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe in order to get notifications of the next episode. We will be doing about 10 to 15-minute episodes covering nitty-gritty subjects about things that people should really know about before buying a business, or at least be aware of things like this that can happen. We'll see you next time.